From the very beginning of this voyage, we had the opportunity to try to share some ideas with students about what it was that they were going to experience. And I think those of us with a little bit of experience knew that the only way it was going to be rewarding is for them to understand who they are so that they can understand, compare, and contrast who the people that they were going to encounter would be. We reminded them very early on in global studies that a fish doesn't understand water until he's taken out of it. So Americans, American society, American politics, American economics, American business, all of those things are so familiar to us when we live in those places that we had to get out of it to try to develop some depth and understanding. So what we said to them essentially was that they needed to engage, they needed to keep that in mind, they needed to make those active comparisons. Most students, when they travel around the world, decide that there are all sorts of things that they'd like to change about themselves, but more especially about the world at large. They'd like to do something, and unfortunately, it's not nearly as easy as they suspect. So we tried to suggest to them from the very beginning that there's a little shorthand that they can use to try to be effective. We said that they had to listen, they had to observe, they had to learn, and then they'd be effective at taking action, what we called Lola. And I think the students who took that seriously developed the kind of perspective to really make a difference. I think there's a lot of hope that some of the students will be able to address the issues and get the job done over the course of their lifetime and really make a difference. But they won't be successful if they underestimate the formidable challenge that exists. A voyage like this really has a fantastic advantage of making them aware of the complexities of the world at large. I shared with them something that the president of CBS said about the way we represent the world as, in short, as villains and victims. And he knows that the world's not that simple, and it's very important for students to understand the world isn't that simple.
In one sense, I don't think I've learned much from this voyage. Before the voyage, if you had told me that there was great poverty in India, I would have agreed. If you told me that there was smog in Beijing, I would have said, I know that. If you told me that, the killing fields in Cambodia, that was a great atrocity, and that Vietnam was scarred by a terrible, unjust war, and that Hiroshima was wrongfully destroyed by an atomic bomb, I would have agreed. I knew all of that. If you went on to mention that in many countries women are oppressed, that religion can drive people to construct vast and stunningly elaborate structures, I would have agreed. All of these facts, and many, many more, I already knew before setting foot on the ship in San Diego last August. But I didn't care about them. Oh, sure, I cared in an abstract sort of way. I was against poverty, ignorance, superstition, environmental degradation, mindless consumerism, and war. And I contributed to the usual international organizations that seek to address them. But for all that, these issues seem to play themselves out only in the pages of the New York Times. However, because of the voyage, I now care. My emotional understanding has caught up with my cognitive understanding. Of course, this is easy to say now that the voyage is almost over. It is inevitable that the raw emotional intensity of the voyage will fade. But if it fades completely, then the voyage will have been just another memory. A good time, perhaps, not a transforming experience. So my hope is that long after the voyage is over, I will continue to be moved by global events, that I will continue to see the lives of foreigners as worthy, and that I will act on what that entails. I hope that I have the strength of character to remain a cosmopolitan.
So what I study as a psychologist is consumerism and materialism, and I think having gone on this trip around the world, it's pretty clear to me, and I think probably to anybody else who's done it, that humans are consumers. You know, we're not that big, we're not that, don't have that greatest senses in terms of our eyesight and such. But one of the things that helped us humans to survive is the fact that we were smart enough to pick up a stick and fight off that saber-toothed tiger when it came our way. Or we were smart enough to gather a bunch of food and store it for a little while so we could survive through the winter. You know, so being a consumer and eating stuff and getting stuff and making pottery and all these things is really part of what it means to be human. And again, you can see this when you go around the world. But the other thing you can really see when you go around the world is how much consumerism is starting to take over. We see McDonald's where we go, we see KFC, we see all these different kinds of parts of American consumerism. And we see all these messages that tell people in developing countries and in other countries around the world that that's the path to a meaningful life, that that's the path to happiness, that that's what they should be spending their time doing, making a bunch of money so they can spend it on stuff. Now, you know, we need stuff. I gotta have clothes, I have to have food, I have to have a place to live. But what's happening increasingly in our world is that we're getting more and more stuff than we need. And the more that we focus our lives around that, the more we focus our lives around consumerism and materialism, what my research shows and what other people's research shows is that it actually diminishes the quality of our life. It makes us less happy. It makes us less satisfied with our lives. It makes us have more problems. It also drives us away from other people. The more we're focusing on money and stuff, the less time it is we are focusing on other people, on having good, healthy relationships. And obviously it's really damaging the world. You know, all that stuff comes from somewhere, and where it comes from is rainforests that get chopped down and prairies that get mowed down, and that stuff goes somewhere. It goes into the air that we breathe and into the water that we drink. So I hope one of the things that people walk away with from this voyage is to recognize some of these dangers to consumerism. You know, it's fun to walk through a market and buy some stuff, but we need to think about what it really means to focus our lives around that and what the consequences are for ourselves and for other people and for the world at large.
Speaking now to students, I'm a professor, you're the students. I give the assignments, you have to do them. You might feel you have to be nice to me, I'm going to give you a grade. You do the work whether you believe in it or not, but then there are the important moments when none of this matters, like when we're all facing seasickness or homesickness, or when we all share food together. And this imbalance in this community, it's like how it is in the world. Some people have wealth, some have citizenship, some have warm homes, and others do not. But ultimately, we're living on this planet together, and to the extent that we engage each other in conversation and with compassion, we will work together to find a better way for everyone. So now we're traveling back to the United States. There we will find family and friends, hopefully. We'll also find the same equalities we found traveling around the globe. We will find a country sent to war by its politicians, diverting precious resources from our domestic needs and from the real needs of the many people we've met around the world. As Americans, we're not special people chosen by some God to live lives of luxury and wage wars against others, while the same God chose to leave people in Myanmar to starve, people in Cambodia to die, people in India to live in squalor, people in Iraq to be in hell. We are all people who are connected by human threads, but kept in our places by governments, ideologies, and corporations that profit from each of us doing our share as producers or consumers in the workplace, the marketplace, the home. If we found our hearts tugged in orphanages and museums in Vietnam and Hiroshima by children begging, selling postcards, then we are people that also can do something about these inequalities. The organizations we join, those we will found, the protest marches in which we carry slogans for peace and justice, the babies we will rock and toss up in the air and tell them they are the same as us, these are all things we can do. What can we do with our lives when we come back to the United States, this land of major inequalities? If you haven't traveled America, do that. Do a semester traveling across the United States and find out what's there. Do a semester with AmeriCorps or Habitat for humanity, or work in a school in a neighborhood which has no more money flowing into it than some of the places as you've described as poor in your reflection papers? Are you a business major or a fashion design major, intern, or start a fair trade company? I have great faith in you. I have great faith in you students, and this is why. It's what I've learned from you and what I've read in your papers.
The thing about Christopher Columbus was that he had one good idea, and he was willing to push it. He was willing to go to governments, to leaders, to people who supported a good idea. And in his search, which of course he failed several times to reach the New World, but he kept persisting. And it seems to me a voyage of discovery is all about finding one good idea in our lives and trying to push it. The question is, what are we? And we're boxes. Most of us, with the exception perhaps of a few young kids on board that have grown tremendously during this trip, will arrive back in the United States almost essentially the same person that left. We haven't changed our IQ, we're not much taller, maybe a little heavier from eating too much, a little less muscle from a lack of exercise. But fundamentally, we're the same person that left physically or biologically. We've accumulated a certain degree of experience, encounters, but you know, like I think one of my colleagues said, if you look for poor kids in the United States, you'll find them. If you want to meet an old man that's full of wisdom or hatred, you'll find them in the United States. You'll find people everywhere at home, the same as you found in the world. And in fact, if you look around, you'll find all the products that you brought overseas in New York, San Francisco, or wherever else, and probably at less than $1. So the thing of it is, when we get home, what really are we left with? Well, we're left with the same box, but the same challenge. And the same challenge that Christopher Columbus faced is that the thing for each one of you is going to be to find one thing in your life that has meaning, and to find that one thing and to pursue it. Now, the only thing I would add to that, in addition to what some of my colleagues have said, the emphasis has been on nonprofit organizations, private organizations, things that are close to all of us. But it's very important to think again about Christopher Columbus. It's a fact. Only 10% of the people change the world. Many of you have walked around the ship with Mao Zedong shirts, Ho Chi Minh shirts, not too many Burmese shirts for the leaders there. But you saw this in Turkey, that Ataturk made such a distinction in the lives there. The important thing to realize is that 10% of the people in the world change the world. And the only way to change the world is through large corporations and government. Don't neglect the importance of power in the world. And power is very important, and all of you pursuing a career in those areas of your of life as you go ahead will take you closer and closer to being one of the people who can change the world. And if you have a good idea, I'm sure you will. Thank you.
It's been interesting to observe students on the ship as they set out from the United States, you know, many of them having never really traveled. And in fact, many of them having grown up within a mediated culture of television and film and popular music and other things. So within that mediated culture, there are certain values and norms and images that have really saturated this generation's experience. It's been really interesting for me to see them leave some of that behind, go out into the world, have much more direct, unmediated contact with other cultures, other people, other value systems. And that's been one of the most satisfying things to watch, I think, is the students who have been able to put some distance between themselves and their own culture and experience the world in new ways, maybe reflect critically on some of the more problematic aspects of the culture in which they grew up, as well as some of the strengths and great contributions of American culture. Another interesting thing for me to observe has been, because I study media, many of our images of the people we're visiting are also mediated. I mean, we learn about the world in the United States through television primarily. It's the number one source of news and information for Americans and our biggest window on the world. But of course, there are selective filters at play in terms of what type of images of the world actually make it onto our screens, which means in practice that Americans have internalized often a number of stereotypes and a number of slightly distorted or superficial images of many of the people that we encountered on this trip. So it's been very satisfying for me to see and participate with this process, in which students have been able to compare the television images of people they encountered with their actual experiences on the streets and in cafes and in other environments. And it's helped our students, I think, correct some misinterpretations about other people in the world, overcome some stereotypes, create friendships with people they may have thought they could have had little in common with. And it's also, again, given them an opportunity to think twice about the media they've grown up with and ask questions about why some of those images might have been problematic. And so probably nowhere was this more accurate than when we were traveling through the Arab world and the larger sort of Muslim world, so both Egypt first and then Turkey especially, and where since 9/11, Americans have certainly seen a lot of images of Arabs and Muslims on television. Many of those images haven't been too flattering, and yet the experience of most of our students in those countries, I think, was very positive and very enriching.
If I am correct in my understandings of what we all have learned on this voyage, I believe the differences we see and feel in ourselves, this thing we're trying to grasp as we come to the end of our voyage, is that we have all learned to think and see in a new way. Like the child's excitement of learning the word shoe in her excitement to being able to go outdoors and explore a whole new world, we too have experienced the power and potential of human emotional interaction. The Japanese generosity and hospitality of the mayor and citizens of Tazurazuka, the Chinese children's giddy excitement at the sunrise flag raising in Tiananmen Square, an intimate conversation with a young Burmese monk named Aga, a chance encounter with a veteran of the American War at the War Remnant Museum in Vietnam, or the ramblings of a bitter anti-Serb Croatian guide were all emotion-saturated encounters. In order to create stable and reflective future societies through shared social problem solving, our ultimate goal, we must remember not the history exclusively, nor the political science lessons exclusively, nor our wonder at seeing the splendors that our species is capable of creating, usually at the expense of someone at the bottom of the social hierarchy, but the emotional connections we made with a child, a rickshaw driver, and of course, our own shipboard community. When you get home, get active, be engaged, get involved, and don't devalue the very first thing you learned as a child. Smile often. Thank you.